Hello, I'm Paul Pinchak with the Restoration Technical Institute. Thank you for signing in to Driving What You Need to Know. If you've been on the road lately, you pretty much have a good idea of some dangerous driving habits and patterns that are starting to emerge, have been emerging actually. You've seen speeding, where perhaps you're in the right-hand lane going at or slightly above the speed limit, and people are passing you 10, 20, 30 miles an hour faster than you're traveling. You've seen people weaving from lane to lane to simply get one car length ahead. You've seen billows of smoke at times coming out of the compartment that people are driving in. You've seen all kinds of behaviors. What we're going to do is talk about these behaviors, what they're leading to, and what the major issues are concerning driving in today's environment. The purpose of the presentation is to not only enlighten you as to what is going on today's roads and highways, but also what you can do about it to best protect yourself and your loved ones while driving. Basically, there are three major categories of issues that are causing the vast majority of road deaths and serious accidents. Those three issues are speed, impairment, and distractions. We're going to first talk about speed. This situation, as written up in this article, took place in a small rural town about 15 miles west of Reading, Pennsylvania. And it's pretty much a horror to think that somebody is driving through regular roads where there's a stoplight every 3 or 4 miles, doing 134 miles an hour when the speed limit is 50. I wish I could tell you that this is an isolated incident, but it's not. Think of the horror of a vehicle traveling this rate of speed in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. Think of what could happen. A pedestrian trying to cross the road, an elderly individual pulling out from a side street. Any number of things could have happened. This individual was not incarcerated. I think that's a very interesting aside. They were let out the day that this happened. Before we get into the details of speeding, impairment, and distractions, I want to talk first about the vehicles of today so that you have an awareness. What we're seeing is elevated incidents of road death and serious accidents, even though we have the safest vehicles that have ever been on the road. Let's talk about a few of these features. Vehicles of today have up to 12 airbags. There is the front airbag, which has been around the longest, over 30 years. There are what we call side torso airbags to protect the body upon side impact. There are what we call curtain airbags, shaped like a tube or a banana, that come from the front of the car and all the way to the back. Curtain airbags have done a lot to minimize brain injuries and side accidents. The important thing to know about the full complement of airbags is that they work only when in conjunction with the seatbelt. It's of great importance that seatbelts be used 100% of the time when on the road. There's a lot of issues involved with seatbelts, but what we have to also keep in mind is that when we have young people in our vehicle, teenagers, young children, their seatbelt habits very often will follow those of the parents. So as a responsible parent, you want to always have your seatbelt on for a lot of reasons, one of which is you want to be a positive influence on the young people entering your vehicle. So again, not to be redundant, but in order for airbags to do their jobs, individuals have to be secured with their 3-point seat belt. Also, don't think that just because you're going around the corner to the grocery store and it's a short trip, you don't need your seat belt. You do. When you're in a shopping mall and you're taking the car from one store to the next because you don't want to walk for whatever reason, you again have to have that seat belt on. There's a lot of bad accidents that occur in shopping centers. We also have what we call crumple zones. These are crumple zones are designed at the front and the rear of the vehicle to absorb the impact, because well over half of vehicle accidents are front and rear. So the crumple zone takes a lot of the energy and displaces it before it gets into the passenger compartment. We have side impact door beams, self-explanatory. We now have collision detection and mitigation. And by that I mean some vehicles today will alert the driver when a collision is about to take place because they have radar type units in the front of the vehicle. Some of these vehicles can also be set to hit the brakes if the driver doesn't. That's called the mitigation aspect. We have anti-lock braking systems. We have rear cross traffic alert. Rear cross traffic alert, some of which have a stop, is a wonderful feature that has prevented a tremendous number of accidents where vehicles are backing up. They're able to get an alert that there's either a person or a vehicle behind them, and it'll either give an audible to the driver and or stop the vehicle. Blind spot warning, pre-tensioners. These are the things that as your seatbelt is sometimes being attached, it will grab you and hold you. Those pre-tensioners kick into place should a frontal impact take place. Lane keep assist, just to name a few. So why is it we've got the safest vehicles ever on the road, yet the number of serious accidents and vehicle-related deaths is going up? We're going to talk about that. I want to share with you some very interesting statistics that I think will surprise you. The full pandemic year of 2020 brought about a tremendous amount of change for everybody. People were working from home, people were shuttered in, people were not driving nearly as much. The actual miles driven in 2020 compared to 2019 was down 11%. The number of crashes was down 22%. And you would think this is very good. Fewer people are on the road, fewer crashes. This next item is hard to therefore understand because deaths in vehicle collisions actually increased 7%, even though the number of crashes was down 22%. This is an amazing and a very sad statistic. We need to do a deeper dive to understand why this is happening. The fact of the matter is speed kills. You could pick up any newspaper in any town, in any state, and you're going to see things like this. I have been observing these things for decades. I have never seen so many single car accidents in my life. We've got rollovers, we've got people running into ditches. This was a very sad situation where the individual driving had children in the car and was traveling at such a high rate of speed that the vehicle flipped. I want to continue talking about the speed issue. Because of the speed impairment and distraction issue, speed is the number one reason for road deaths and serious injuries. It should be noted that every time a speed limit is increased on a road, that in subsequent years, the road deaths associated with that speed limit increase goes up 8%. So you may ask yourself a pretty good question, and that is, why is it that we continue to increase the speed limit on our roads if it translates into more road deaths? And it's a good question. If we go back over a very long period of time, 2.5 decades, There's been approximately 37,000 deaths throughout the country as a result of the increase in the speed limits. Speed limits in states that have very high 80 miles an hour or greater are clearly reporting the highest frequency of road deaths and serious injuries. That would be Texas, Montana, Utah, and Nevada, Wyoming also. This is an interesting chart that a lot of people would take exception with, and let me walk you through it. A lot of my work experience is with the insurance industry, specifically car insurance. And what we've learned is that on the left, if an individual has no speeding violations at all in the last 3 years, we're going to use that as a baseline. And that's why number of speeding violations is 0, and the increase is 0 means it's our baseline. For individuals who have 1 speeding violation in the last 3 years, there is an increase in the likelihood of an at-fault accident, but it's minimal. It's about 3 or 4%. The numbers start to change when you have 2 speeding tickets in the last 3 years. That then increases the likelihood of an at-fault accident by up to 20%. And for the individual who is pretty much a chronic speeder, 3 speeding violations, we're up to 20 and 35% range of increased likelihood of an at-fault accident. This is why insurance companies will elevate the rate for people with speeding tickets, not just accidents. Important statistic to know, particularly at a time where I feel auto rate increases are going to start taking place across the board as a result of a number of different considerations. So you want to keep that driving record clean. You want to keep your speeding violations to 0 if you can, for a lot of good reasons. Not only the premium you pay for auto insurance, but also it reduces the likelihood of an at-fault accident if you are consistently driving at or below the speed limit. I want to talk about winter driving, because winter driving can be very hazardous, very treacherous. This is an interesting headline. If you would, just take a quick look at it and see the way in which our newspaper depicted the accidents, blaming an 8-vehicle crash on the icy road. Interesting to think about, because if everybody was going a lot slower, proceeding much more cautiously, perhaps this would have not been an 8-vehicle crash, but everybody would have been able to get home safely. So what's the lesson here? The lesson here is that just because a speed limit is 55, 60, 65 doesn't mean you have to travel at that speed limit. What you've got to do is use judgment and skill and think through your situation and think through whether or not you want to slow down because of road conditions. Ice is very treacherous. I'm going to show you a video. Actual video, could have taken place anywhere. Happens to have been in the Midwest a few years ago. We just had one of these here in Pennsylvania. Almost identical set of circumstances. Notice the speed that everyone's traveling. This is a very scary situation to be in, because at a certain point you have no control as to what is going on. And the vehicles coming upon this backup do so very quickly. It leads to running off the road. It leads to multiple impacts, not only on the roadway, but off the roadway. So what do? We proceed with caution when conditions warrant it. Again, you don't always have to be operating at the speed limit. There are times when we should actually be driving at half the speed limit because of conditions such as this. And let me add one other thing, because we recently lived through what's called a snow squall. Very often when a squall is taking place or about to take place, you'll get a notification on your telephone, or someone will call you, or you will see it up ahead. If you can, and you have the information that a snow squall is about to take place, The best thing you can do is either stay put where you are, if it's in a safe venue, or pull off of a main road, find a side road, and find a safe parking lot. The reason I say in a snow squall you want to get off a major highway is for the very reasons you just saw on the pile-up that took place. Snow squalls bring about very, very dangerous conditions, and they come on very quickly. So be attentive, be alert, use good judgment. What we're talking about with regard to snow and ice is pretty obvious, even though we don't always use the caution we should. But we don't think about rain. Rain is also a major factor in deadly crashes. Something as innocent as light rain or drizzle actually increases the likelihood of an at-fault accident by 27%. When you elevate the amount of rain to a moderate range, we're now up to 75%. And for those who have been in heavy rain, this won't surprise you. Increases the likelihood of a deadly crash by over 200% if you're continuing to drive in very heavy rain. These are some really scary numbers. When you look at the total for all types of rain, the increase in the likelihood of a deadly crash in all types of rain is a 34% increase. The theme here and the lesson here is to use good judgment in snow, in sleet, in ice, and in rain. We started off by saying we've got three major issues. One of them is speed, one of them is impairment. Impairment is serious. Okay, so when we talk about the issue of impairment, we know the dangers of DUI, alcohol involvement. We know that we made progress for decades, and now all of a sudden in 2020 and 2021, the amount of alcohol-related deaths and serious accidents is on the rise. When we talk about impairment, we have to also include impairment caused by drugs and marijuana. Marijuana can cause intoxication. Marijuana can affect each user differently. It can cause temporary psychosis. It can have an impact on cognitive and motor skills. It can produce addictive effects when mixed with alcohol, a particularly dangerous combination. Fatal crashes have increased for operators who have been known to be using marijuana. The other interesting thing about marijuana that we need to pay attention to is that the driver may not be using it themselves, but a passenger or passengers could be. The car filling with smoke from marijuana could be affecting the driver. And so it's something to be mindful of and be aware of. In states that have legalized marijuana for recreational use, Colorado, Washington have done so for many, many years. When we monitor the incidence of collisions, we know that in the years following the legalization, that the frequency of collisions has gone up. Please understand, I am not advocating that people don't drink, that people don't do whatever it is they do. The point is that combining it with driving is very dangerous. The third item I want to deal with is distracted driving. We talked about speed, we talked about impairment. Distracted driving is another major problem in our country. We define distracted driving as any activity that takes the driver's attention off the road. About 1 in 4 accidents are brought about as a result of distracted driving. It is now the number 3 cause of fatal crashes in the United States. To recap, speeding is number 1, driving impaired is number 2, and now we have distractions as number 3. And understand that the combination is very often there, where you have someone speeding and being distracted. So it's not a real clear breakdown, but we do know that speed, impairment, and distractions are the big 3. We need to spend a little time talking about distractions because they have had a very serious and detrimental effect on road deaths. Distraction-related fatalities are at about 3,300 a year. 10% of all traffic-related fatalities can now be attributed primarily to distractions. And this is the number that's a real shocker. Yeah, we've got 3,300 deaths, but we have over 400,000 people injured in distraction-related accidents a year. Texting is considered the most serious distraction. Why? Because it's very widespread. Think about this. The average text message to receive it, read it, or write it and send it takes 4.4 seconds. If you're going 60 miles an hour, that's about the length of a football field. Does anyone want to be distracted or be near anyone who is distracted because of a text message for 100 yards? I don't think so. Texting requires visual, manual, and cognitive attention. That cognitive piece is very important because when driving, if you are distracted for any reason at all, it means that you are not paying 100% to driving. We live in a world where people do a lot of different things at one time. It's not unusual that somebody is got their headphones on, they're listening to music, they're doing their homework and talking to a friend, all at the same time. And that may work for those activities. When it comes to driving, I think we really have to focus on just driving and not doing anything else. Recent survey results show that 75% of people use a mobile device while driving. Reading texts, reading emails, 48%. Checking social media, 23%. Really? You have to check social media while driving? Think about it. Recording a video, 18%. Shocking to me. On FaceTime, we know that people very often will have their phone in its holster and be either FaceTiming or on a Zoom meeting. Very serious stuff when you're trying to remain focused on driving. Distracted driving has been called a national public health issue, and indeed it is. Before we conclude, I wanted to hit on two other things. One is drowsiness and daydreaming, because it's very real. Up to 79,000 crashes a year can be attributed to drowsiness and daydreaming. Over 800 deaths in 2019. 1 in 4 drivers have admitted to struggling to stay awake while driving. Driver fatigue is a factor in 34% of fatal truck accidents. Incredible. Truckers have very hard jobs. They have very long hours. They have to be attentive 100% of the time. So the drowsiness and daydreaming issue becomes greatly heightened with respect to truck drivers. Road rage and anger. Why is this even in here? It's in here because it's important and people have to understand what's going on out there. We're coming out of, hopefully coming out of a phase in our lives where people have been isolated. There's a considerable amount of fear, depression. Everything factors into that when we talk about things like road rage. 80% of those interviewed do express anger or aggression in the last year. Common behaviors that we see. Purposely tailgating. My goodness, how serious is that? Yelling, screaming, getting agitated at another individual. While you're agitated and yelling, screaming, you're not paying 100% attention to your driving. Honking at someone else doesn't really get you anywhere. Aggressive and vulgar gestures, don't do it. All too common. Blocking a lane so that the driver who supposedly offended you cannot proceed safely. Incredibly common. Cutting off a vehicle. Common. 4% of road rage incidents involve actually getting out of a vehicle to create a confrontation. How serious is that? Bumping another vehicle deliberately. 3%. My goodness, why do it? Younger generations are more likely to act out, although in this day and age we're seeing it across the board. What's the answer to this issue of road rage? Condition yourself. Do not offend and do not get drawn in. Be tolerant. Be forgiving. I know at times it's very difficult to do. Do not respond to somebody who is trying to aggravate you. Make no eye contact. As we close this presentation, let's reflect on what we've learned. And more importantly, let's reflect on what we can do to create as safe a driving environment for ourselves and our loved ones as we can. Number one, manage your speed for conditions. We talked about ice, we talked about rain, we talked about snow, we talked about squalls. Be careful. Manage your speed for the conditions. Keep a safe distance. This is one that I particularly find, I just don't understand how it is and why it is that people tailgate and ride your bumper. The rule of thumb is that for every 10 miles an hour that you keep a 2-car length distance from the vehicle in front of you. And I understand that if you're traveling at 60, that means 12 car lengths, which will get you a lot of attention at times. People climbing up your bumper, people honking at you, and so on. But I would ask that you consider 2 car lengths for every 10 miles an hour, roughly, your thought process as you're on the roads. Wear a seatbelt at all times. We talked about that. If impaired in any way, do not drive. Most states have an impairment limit of 0.08 alcohol. One state I know of has reduced it to 0.05. And interestingly enough, in the years following that state's reduction to 0.05, the number of alcohol-related vehicle deaths went down dramatically. Pull over if you're using the phone, other than in a very short conversation that requires no thinking. Pull over if you need to take a text or send a text. Same with email. Pull over if you are about to FaceTime. If you're teleconferencing, for God's sakes, don't be driving. It requires too much of your attention, and that means you're not giving 100% attention to your driving. In other words, use your good judgment. Avoid being drawn into any type of range. You have other options. A final thought. Be aware of your surroundings at all times. In the military, they talk about situational awareness. It changes constantly. Be attentive. Pay attention. Road conditions. Other cars and trucks. In front of you. Behind you. Both sides of you. Vehicles stopped ahead. Cannot overstress the importance of this. I'll be honest, there's been times where I am constantly checking my 3 mirrors. The 2 side mirrors and the one right in front of you, to have that understanding of situational awareness. And I have pulled over because I didn't like what was going on in the vehicle behind me. Eating a chicken leg, flailing their arms, riding close to my bumper. I don't want anything to do with that situation. And my situational awareness leads me to make the decision that I don't want to be in the line of sight of this individual, and I'll pull over. Be attentive. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you learned about some of the issues that are facing us in today's driving world, and more importantly, how you can be safer and protect yourself and those you care about. Thank you for joining us and learning with rtilearning.com.